Have you ever found yourself fascinated by the idea of a visionary? Someone who promises to change the world, disrupt entire industries, and lead us into a brighter future? I know I have. But what happens when that vision starts to blur? When the lines between innovation and deceit begin to fade? That's what I kept wondering as I dove into the stories of Elizabeth Holmes and Martin Shkreli, two figures who in their own ways captured the world's attention and ultimately its ire. Elizabeth Holmes, the once celebrated founder of Theranos, who promised to revolutionize blood testing. And Martin Shkreli, Pharma Bro, the man who infamously hiked the price of a life-saving drug overnight. At first glance, they seem worlds apart, but their paths share a troubling similarity. Both aimed high, both fell hard. But who was worse? And what does that even mean? Let's start with Elizabeth Holmes. She was born on February 1984 in Washington, D.C., and she was a bright student from a well-to-do family. From an early age, she exhibited a keen interest in technology and science, even learning Mandarin to prepare for a future in global business. She enrolled at Stanford University to study chemical engineering, but she had bigger plans. In 2003, at just 19, she dropped out of Stanford to start Theranos, promising that its Edison test could detect conditions such as cancer and diabetes quickly without the hassle of needles with just a few drops of blood. Holmes' vision was captivating. She managed to attract investors, raising nearly $700 million. She built a board of directors filled with high-profile figures like Henry Kissinger, the former United States Secretary of State. And in 2015, Forbes had named Holmes the youngest and wealthiest self-made female billionaire in the United States on the basis of a $9 billion valuation of her company. But the truth behind her technology was far less impressive. That same year in 2015, suspicions began to arise with journalists like John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal digging deeper into the claims Theranos was making. His investigation revealed that the company's technology was fundamentally flawed and that the few tests it did run were performed using traditional machines, not the innovative devices Holmes had promised. Her house of cards collapsed, leading to a federal investigation and a trial that culminated in 2023 with Holmes being sentenced to 11 years in prison for fraud and was fined $452 million to be paid to the victims of her scheme. Now let's turn to Martin Shkreli. He was born on March 1983 to Albanian and Croatian immigrants in Brooklyn, New York. He was known as a brilliant, yet rebellious child, often getting into trouble at school. He showed an early interest in finance, eventually earning a degree in business from Baruch College. Shkreli first gained attention in the pharmaceutical industry by founding Retrofin, a company that specialized in developing treatments for rare diseases, and in November 2013, Shkreli was chosen for the Forbes 30 Under 30. However, he was ousted from Retrofin for alleged misuse of company funds. But Shkreli's notoriety skyrocketed in 2015 when his new company, Touring Pharmaceuticals, acquired the rights to Daraprim, a life-saving drug used to treat HIV patients, and he raised the price overnight from $14 to $750 per pill. This move drew widespread condemnation from the public and politicians like Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Unlike Holmes, who tried to maintain a facade of respectability, Shkreli reveled in his infamy, often engaging in public spats and taunting his critics. His downfall, however, was unrelated to the Daraprim scandal. Shkreli was charged with securities fraud for his time at Retrofin, accused of running a Ponzi-like scheme to repay disgruntled investors from his previous hedge funds. In 2017, he was convicted and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He was, however, released in 2022 after serving 5 years, and he still has to pay more than $60 million to his victims. Shkreli was then banned from the pharmaceutical industry for life, plus was permanently barred from running a public company. So here we are, two different figures with two different crimes, but both left a lasting impact on the industries they were a part of. What drives someone like Holmes or Shkreli? Is it ambition, greed, or is there something more at play? Let's start with motivation. Elizabeth Holmes genuinely seemed to believe in her vision. She wanted to change the world, to leave a legacy. But somewhere along the line, that vision became more important than the truth. She was willing to deceive investors, doctors, and patients, all to keep the dream alive. I found myself wondering, was it the pressure of living up to her own hype? Or was it something darker, a willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone to achieve her goals? Shkreli, on the other hand, seemed driven by profit and notoriety. He wasn't out to change the world, he was out to make money, and he didn't care who got hurt in the process. He's often described as a narcissist, someone who thrived on being hated. But does that make him worse than Holmes, who deceived people with the promise of something good? Now, let's talk business tactics. Holmes built Theranos on a foundation of lies. She faked demonstrations, pressured employees to keep quiet, and manipulated data to secure investments. It was all about maintaining the illusion of success, and for a while it worked. Shkreli's tactics were different. He was transparent about his greed, and when he raised the price of Daraprime, he didn't hide behind excuses. He openly admitted it was about profit, about maximizing shareholder value. It was cold, calculated, and unapologetic. But here's where it gets tricky. He didn't lie about what he was doing, but the impact of his actions was devastating. Which is worse? Deceiving people for years or openly exploiting a system to make a quick buck? And what about their public images? Holmes carefully crafted hers, her deep voice, black turtlenecks, all to evoke the image of a tech visionary. She was seen as the next big thing, a female Steve Jobs, but when the truth came out, that image shattered. It was as if the world had been duped and the backlash was swift and brutal. Shkreli, on the other hand, embraced his role as the villain. He was defiant, smug, almost daring the world to hate him, and it worked. But in a strange way, his transparency about being the bad guy made his actions less shocking, more expected. With Holmes, it felt like a betrayal. With Shkreli, it was more of a confirmation of what we already suspected. But here's the thing, while both face justice, I can't help but feel that their punishments reflect more than just their crimes. They reflect our collective disappointment in what they represented. Holmes, the failure of the Silicon Valley dream, and Shkreli, the ugly side of capitalism. So, who's worse? I'm not sure there's a simple answer. Both Holmes and Shkreli remind us that the line between genius and infamy is thin, and that it's easy to cross without even realizing it. They're both cautionary tales, but for different reasons. Holmes shows us the dangers of believing our own hype, of letting ambition blind us to the truth. Shkreli, on the other hand, is a stark reminder of what happens when profit becomes the only goal. When we forget that behind every dollar, there are real people with real lives hanging in the balance. He saw an opportunity and took it without regard for the consequences. He's not the first, and he won't be the last to exploit a broken system. He is a reflection of a system that allows and sometimes even encourages such behavior. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. But what about us? What does our fascination with these stories say about our own values, our own complicity? Are we in some way responsible for creating the environments that allow people like Holmes and Shkreli to rise to power? And if so, what can we do to prevent the next fall from grace? Perhaps the lesson here isn't just about the individuals, but about the systems and cultures that enable them. Elizabeth Holmes and Martin Shkreli may be two sides of the same coin of ambition and greed, but they also hold up a mirror to the world we live in. A world where innovation is worshipped, but sometimes at the cost of integrity. A world where profit is king, even when it comes at the expense of human life. Therefore, who was worse? I'll leave that for you to decide. But as you do, remember that it's not just about pointing fingers, it's about understanding the bigger picture, about asking ourselves how we got here and what we can do to change it. Because in the end, the real question isn't about them, it's about us. As I walk away from these stories, I'm reminded of something I heard once. The true measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable. It's a simple idea, but one that carries a lot of weight, and that's something worth thinking about.